Chapter 1. The First Cut. The fog was thick and unrelenting, wrapping the cobblestone streets of Whitechapel in a suffocating embrace. Constable Reginald Carter had seen countless London nights like this, but tonight an unusual chill seeped into his bones. It wasn't just the cold, it was the silence, the kind of silence that pressed on his eardrums and set his nerves on edge. At the stroke of midnight, a scream tore through the air. It was sharp and raw, the sound of someone facing pure terror. Carter sprinted toward the sound, his lantern bobbing as his boots slapped against the damp stones. He turned a corner and froze. There, sprawled in the flickering light, was the lifeless body of a young woman. Her throat had been savagely cut, and blood pooled beneath her in an ever-expanding stain. Beside her lay a note written in crimson ink. "The future is mine to carve." Chapter 2. Unseen Patterns. Scotland Yard was abuzz with theories, but none made sense. The killings were too precise, too clean in some ways, yet hauntingly brutal in others. Detective Inspector Margaret Harlow sifted through the evidence with a growing sense of unease. The notes left at each crime scene mentioned things that shouldn't exist. Words like quantum and continuum, scribbled alongside phrases like "time bends to my blade."
"Who is this lunatic?"
muttered Sergeant Phillips, leaning over her shoulder.
"Sounds like he's writing riddles."
Margaret frowned.
"They're not riddles. They're warnings."
She pointed to the most recent note, which included a chilling line. "This night will repeat until the perfect cut is made." Chapter 3. The Stranger. Across town, in a dimly lit tavern, a man in an immaculate suit sat alone, nursing a glass of brandy. He watched the room with a predator's gaze, his dark eyes darting between patrons as if measuring their worth. His name was Dr. Elias Vane, at least that's what he called himself in this era. Elias was no ordinary man. Beneath the polished facade lay a traveler of centuries, a man who had seen the rise and fall of empires. The device hidden in his coat pocket hummed faintly, a piece of technology far beyond the understanding of 19th century minds. And with each passing moment, he felt the pull of the timeline, urging him toward his next experiment. Chapter 4. The Chase. Margaret's investigation led her to the alleys of Whitechapel late one evening. She had pieced together enough to know that the killer wasn't working alone, at least, not entirely. Witnesses described a strange glow in the air whenever the murders occurred, as if reality itself bent and shimmered. Her instincts screamed at her to leave as she rounded a corner and saw him, a tall man in a dark coat, his face obscured by shadows. In his hand, a blade gleamed unnaturally, catching light that wasn't there.
"Stop!"
she commanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. But he didn't run. Instead, he smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips that sent a shiver down her spine.
"Inspector Harlow," he
said, his voice smooth as silk.
"You're braver than I expected."
Chapter 5. Timelines Collide. Elias wasn't merely killing for sport. Each victim was carefully chosen, their deaths orchestrated to alter the course of history. But Margaret wasn't just any investigator. She was an anomaly, someone whose presence disrupted his calculations. As she pursued him across London, Margaret began to experience flashes of memories that weren't hers, glimpses of skyscrapers, roaring engines, and glowing screens. The more she unraveled his plans, the more she felt the fabric of time unraveling around her. Elias knew he couldn't let her interfere. She was the one variable he hadn't accounted for, and if he couldn't control her, the entire timeline would collapse. Chapter 6. The Final Confrontation. In an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the Thames, Margaret cornered Elias. The device in his hand sparked wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls.
You don't understand,
he said, his tone almost pleading. I'm not the villain here. I'm trying to fix what's broken.
By murdering innocent people?
She shot back, her revolver trained on him.
They're not innocent. They're keystones, linchpins in a flawed design. Their lives are a small price to pay for a better future.
Margaret's finger tightened on the trigger.
And who decides that? You?
The room seemed to hold its breath as the timeline teetered on the edge of chaos. In the end, it would come down to a single choice, one that would determine whether Elias's twisted vision would come to pass, or if Margaret could restore the natural order of time. Chapter 7. Fractures in the Glass. Margaret pulled the trigger, and time itself seemed to shatter. The bullet passed through Elias, but instead of falling, he glowed, an ethereal light bursting from his chest as his device overloaded. The warehouse walls bent and blurred, and Margaret felt herself being yanked through an invisible seam in reality. She landed in a place that defied logic, a vast expanse of shifting light and shadow, where time appeared to flow in every direction at once. Elias's voice echoed around her.
Do you see now, Inspector? This is the truth of our existence, a tapestry of infinite threads, each one a choice.
Margaret struggled to her feet, her mind reeling.
You've destroyed everything.
No,
He replied, his form flickering.
I've given us a chance to rewrite it.
Chapter 8. A World Reborn. When Margaret awoke, she was back in Whitechapel, but it was different. The fog was gone, replaced by a clear, starry sky. People bustled through the streets, unaware of the cataclysmic events that had unfolded. She checked her pocket and found a single, cryptic note. The blade cuts both ways. Though Elias was gone, Margaret knew his work wasn't finished. The timeline was fragile, and echoes of his presence lingered. But she also understood her role now, not just as an investigator, but as a guardian of time itself. Chapter 9. Echoes of Tomorrow. Margaret spent weeks acclimating to the altered timeline, noticing subtle changes. Newspapers hinted at technologies decades ahead of their time, and whispers of impossible machines surfaced in industrial circles. She realized Elias's tampering had left scars on history, and those scars were starting to show. One night, she received an anonymous letter. The handwriting was eerily similar to Elias's, and the message was brief. Meet me where it began. Whitechapel's familiar streets led her to the alley where the first murder occurred. Standing there was a figure cloaked in shadow, his features hidden beneath a hood. But this wasn't Elias. It was someone else, holding a device identical to his.
You've been chosen,
The figure said, their voice distorted. The timeline needs a guardian, and it's far from safe. Margaret realized her fight wasn't over. Elias may have been the beginning, but there were others who understood the secrets of time and sought to control it. With a reluctant nod, she accepted the device handed to her, feeling its weight both in her hand and in her destiny. As the figure disappeared, Margaret stared at the glowing machine. It pulsed rhythmically, as if alive, and she knew her journey was just beginning. Epilogue. The Eternal Watch. Years later, tales of a mysterious protector began circulating in hushed tones across London. A shadowy figure, always one step ahead of disasters, appeared and vanished without a trace. Some said she was an angel, others whispered of a ghost. But Margaret Harlow knew the truth. Armed with knowledge of time's fragility and the tools to navigate it, she had embraced her role. She was no longer just a detective. She was the keeper of the timeline, forever watching, forever protecting. And somewhere, in the ever-shifting currents of time, the echo of a familiar voice lingered. The blade cuts both ways.